Well, good morning, folks. Welcome back. I am BK, Director of the Park Maintenance Institute, and thank you for joining us today. Our session this morning shows a little age for at least myself, because it's when I hear the title, Show Me the Money, I immediately thought of Tom Cruise yelling at me. So before we get started, I just want to go over a few housekeeping points. When you joined the session, your microphone was muted. Please stay muted throughout the session unless we are asked to unmute and ask questions. This session is being recorded and will be available for registered conference attendees through the end of the year. If you have any questions as we go along, please use the chat box, and I will either interject those if it suits possible at the moment, or we'll wait until the end to ask those questions. This session has been approved for 0.1 CEU or 1 contact hour. Do not forget to write down the CEU code word as we go through. I'll put that into the chat box and put that in a survey at the very end of the conference so you get all your credits. And for now, I would like to introduce Elvis Cordova. He's the Vice President of Public Policy and Advocacy with the National Recreation and Parks Association. His bio in front of me here is intimidating. And so instead of going through it all, I'm going to hand it over to Elvis, let him introduce himself, and see how he can show us the money.
Thank you, BK. Really appreciate it. And it's a pleasure to be here with you all. So a little bit about my background. I've been with NRPA now for a little over a year and a half. But in COVID time, it feels like 5 years. So it's been an interesting time for all of us. Prior to this, I was in the federal government for about, let's say, just under 15 years, mostly in the agriculture and alternative energy space, working at the Department of Energy, the Farm Credit Administration, and USDA. Prior to that, had done some international development work with the United Nations. And early in my career, had a stint at a small park and rec agency, the New York City Department of Parks and Rec. All right, somebody at least, yeah. I'm always hoping that one goes off well. So thank you, folks, for the warm welcome. Pleasure to be here with you all today. I was actually looking forward to the live conference and getting the opportunity to be able to meet all of y'all in person. I know that last year I was able to present virtually, but there's just no replacing meeting in person. So keeping fingers crossed that hopefully in the near future, we'll be able to meet in person, because one of the things I really do enjoy is learning from you all in terms of your challenges, the ideas, and the experience that you all are having, because really our job at NRPA is be able to represent your needs, represent or find solutions to the challenges that you all are facing. And so I always find that having those personal interactions works, because it's all about building relationships. And as we get into the presentation, I definitely welcome your ideas, your thoughts. If you have questions, please put them into the chat. I know that BK will be monitoring them. If they're relevant, I can answer them now, but there will be a question and answer in the end of the presentation. So what I will do now is share my screen so you all can see the presentation. And I'm just going to go off video to help with the why isn't it showing? Give me 1 second, folks. It was showing before, and now it's not. Yep, here it is. Oh, hold on. I have to show all windows. There it is. All right. And let's here. Where's that presentation? Perfect. Share. Hopefully you all can see the presentation now. And what I will do is I will go off video. One more second here, folks, because I might go off video. Let me stop the share. Let me go off video and now do the share, and that should help with the bandwidth. All right. Hopefully you can all see the presentation now.
We can see your slide deck. Yeah.
All right, good, perfect. All right, show me the money, as was the movie line. And we're going to talk about federal resources available for your department. The agenda is I will go over the American Rescue Plan. I'll talk a little bit about NRPA's policy priorities leading into the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. I'll talk about some workforce development resources, talk about some of the conservation resources that are available from the federal government, and then talk about community project funding, which I'll explain what that means. And then we'll talk about how to get more information to access federal resources. And as I said, there'll be question and answer time at the end of the presentation there. So with that being said, we'll dive right in and talk about the American Rescue Plan. As you'll remember, this was signed by President Biden on March 11, 2001. It was a $1.9 trillion economic stimulus package to deal with the economic damage that was done by the pandemic. Now, parks and recreations can still benefit from the American Rescue Plan because funding to cover costs are still available to be applied for costs that are incurred through the end of December 31st, 2024, and all funding must be spent by December 31, 2026. And so we, our policy team, took a dive into what were some of the elements of the American Rescue Plan that could provide benefits for the park and rec field. And so the first one that really stood out with us was really the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds. That was $350 billion that was available. 219.8 billion was available for states and 130.2 billion was available for local governments. Out of that, just under 46 billion was available for large cities, and just under 20 billion was available for smaller cities, usually 50,000 residents or less. Now, some of these particular aspects of this funding was that it can be used to improve public spaces in areas that are disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. It also has money for projects in a qualified census tract that can include improving park spaces that will benefit the health and wellness of those communities. Now, this was designed to help with the maintenance and upkeep resulting from the increased use of parks during the pandemic, and addressing these issues is allowable under the ARP funding, the American Rescue Plan funding. The trick to all this has been, and we've been really looking to identify case studies of localities and municipalities that have been able to use this money. And I'll have to tell you that key to all of this was really being able to touch base with your county and state level officials and letting them know what your needs are. Because to some extent, once that money is sent over to state, and once that money is sent over to local governments, it's really up to them how they how they want to use it, as long as it fits into these particular areas. So we've been hearing great success stories out of California. We've been hearing out of Michigan, North Carolina, where they've been able to really make a compelling case to their state and county officials and even their city officials to be able to tap into these particular funds, both for programming as well as for the maintenance and upkeep. So I highly encourage that you start those conversations with elected officials and city managers to let them know what those needs are. But additional to that was 21.9 billion that was provided to local education agencies and school districts for learning recovery, including after school and summer programs. I know that our park and rec agencies have provided after school summer programs as well as out of school time when schools were closed. I know that during the pandemic, most recreation centers really doubled up. as education centers. So definitely the opportunity to make the case for that. There was $10 billion to fund broadband infrastructure, digital connectivity, and multi-purpose community facility projects. So definitely encourage you to really think creatively there. I know that Baltimore County was one example where we were able to find that they were able to get money for a STEM center within their recreation centers, and also took on esports, which allowed them to tap into that money because it had to do with broadband infrastructure. Then there was $8.5 billion to state education agencies to address student academic, social, emotional, and mental health needs, including after school and summer programs. So this is separate than the $2.9 billion, but again, an opportunity here to really be able to make the case of how the park and rec agencies have been able to provide these particular services to cities. And as we move to the next one, there was $1.4 billion for programmings for the Older Americans Act, including support for nutrition and community-based support programs. So I know that the programming in some of our recreation centers has provided a lot of support towards older Americans. So again, another opportunity where those can be tapped. And then there was $1 billion to expand member and volunteer opportunities, including working with nonprofits to work in underserved communities. So again, an opportunity to really see what partnerships are in place and how collectively you all can work with those partners to be making the case of why this money should be allocated to your particular agency. And lastly, there was $240 million available in travel, tourism, and outdoor recreation. These are competitive grants that would help communities dependent on those activities to recover and boost from future infrastructure resilience. And, you know, we have a lot of park and recreation agencies that serve seaside communities. Or really depend on the travel and tourism aspects. So again, you would be eligible for those particular funds. And so again, the trick here is to really work collaboratively with your partners, whatever coalitions you're part of, to be able to go to your elected officials, because as you can imagine, they are being bombarded with a lot of asks. But when it's done collectively and they can see that they can support with funding to multi-purpose use, it's usually a smarter way for them to be spending that money. It's something that they would gravitate to. So the advocacy piece of this is really important, that you're able to tap into that advocacy and be able to make those. The other part of this too is also making the public aware of your park and recreation department's needs, because if the public can also be on your side, I've always said that if you have the public's voice, you definitely have the ear of the elected officials. And so really being able to communicate to the public, you know, that in order to expand the programming or the maintenance costs that you're looking for the funding, so they themselves can become ambassadors for what you're looking to do. And we've seen great success stories. Again, Michigan was able to really lead coalitions and you know, public support that really had the governor's ear and allowed the governor to invest $250 million in state parks and $125 million in local parks. So again, it's how you're able to do the advocacy work that matters too. With that being said, wanted to move on to the next slide. Oh, yeah, I should have gone through this because now is the time to act. You definitely want to be talking to folks now to come up with the ideas and make the case successfully to your elected officials. Because as we all know, parks and recs are vital to communities. This is one of my favorite slides, and it comes from our park creation response to COVID-19 report that we released earlier this year. One of the reasons it's, you know, to me a compelling graphic, because it looks at all of the different aspects that park and recreation took on during the pandemic, whether it was the public health, the education, it was the housing, you know, providing emergency shelters or hygiene stations, the public safety, the mental health aspect, the transportation, you know, all of these particular services for communities are vital and will continue to be vital as we recover from the pandemic. And at the center of this is Parks and Recreation. We've been definitely looking to see how Parks and Recreation have taken on additional duties. And of course, during the pandemic, large, over 60% of park and recreation agencies took on these on top of staying open and providing the programming and maintenance for communities. So again, I've always felt that parks and recreation were there when communities needed them. And now it's really time for communities to be able to be there when parks and recreation need them, because I know that many budgets have been strained, and the additional duties that have been taken on have taken a toll on agencies. So it's fair to say that we definitely should be receiving additional funding to be able to maintain, because these particular programs aren't necessarily going to have a way in the near future, and they will continue to be provided by Park and Rec agencies. So highly encourage you to look at the graphic. You'll get the presentation, but think of how you can be working with coalitions and the public to be able to make that case more compelling. As we were moving into the infrastructure bill and the reconciliation package, we at NRPA developed, the top priorities that we wanted to move forward to Congress. And these were basically broken down into 5 groups. We wanted to make sure that there was investment in local communities. And so the one-time $500 million investment for local parks through the Parks, Job and Equity Act was something that we worked with our coalition members on to really move forward. Happy to say it has a check mark, because that particular priority is included in the reconciliation package, what's now being called the Build Back Better Act, which is now being looked at by Congress and will likely be voted on this week, if not next. What they're waiting for is the Congressional Budget Office to provide them with a cost estimate of how much that particular act would cost. And after that, Congress will vote. You probably heard a lot about it. Now, that one-time $500 million investment is actually reduced to a $100 million investment, but it's still $100 million more that wasn't available before. We also really leaned on supporting conservation jobs. So looking at forward-looking job opportunities that improve outdoor spaces. And for us, this was the Climate Conservation Corps. What was key for us was to really advocate and allow elected officials congressional officials to know that Parks and Recreation agencies should have direct access, both at the state and local level, to these particular programs, because the funding would be important, because it would allow state and local park and recreation agencies to develop programs that would keep local economies thriving, as well as be able to hire and create workforce development opportunities from that are reflective of their local communities. And so we were successful in that. And for the reconciliation package, again, the Build Back Better plan, that has been included in there. We also were really adamant about increasing investments for water, wastewater, and green infrastructure. So that was funding clean water state revolving funds and drinking water state revolving funds. That has a check mark, because that was included in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which I'll talk about in a minute. So that was a great win for us. And there was a specific set aside for green infrastructure, which would allow state and local park and rec agencies to really be able to develop some of that green infrastructure and conservation projects. Now, what was left was investing in smarter public health. So for us was funding community-based programming to tackle chronic and infectious diseases, increase immunizations, and other preventative care services. And that was the CDC's Prevention and Public Health Fund. It's got a box because it quite hasn't been fulfilled yet, but we are hopeful that it will be included and will move forward. And we also wanted to support child nutrition, and that was funding child nutrition programs that would address food insecurity, particularly among children. And for us, this was all really put together in the Child Nutrition Act reauthorization. There have been a lot of talk about it. This particular act has lapsed for 5 years. But there was a lot of momentum being built for it this year, and we're hopeful that in the next session of Congress, it will move forward. So these, again, were the main policy priorities, but there were other projects that we were pushing forward too. We just wanted to, create a list that was compelling to both our members and was going to be compelling to elected officials for inclusion. As you can see, we had a pretty good success rate, and we're hopeful that we'll be able to get the others across the finishing line. And so with that, I wanted to move into the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And so this was signed by President this past Monday, November 15th, and it's a $1.2 trillion economic stimulus package. It provides significant opportunities for local parks and recreation, which I'll go through shortly. And as we're also looking at how federal agencies will be implementing, that has become laws. The federal agencies are looking to develop the grant programs and the different programs that will implement this particular law. We at NRPA have been engaging with agencies. And one of the things we've done is, traditionally we've worked a lot with the Department of Interior, but as the earlier graphic showed, Parks and Recreation touches all aspects of life. So we've been really adamant about expanding that sphere of influence and meeting with the Department of Transportation. We've been meeting with Health and Human Services. We've been meeting with the Department of Labor. We've been meeting with USDA because it's important for officials in those agencies to know what park and recreation agencies are doing. I'll tell you from my experience when I was working at the federal level, you're only as good as the information that you have in front of you. And your experience, obviously, and that's really how your decision making comes about. And so it was always important when groups would come to talk to us to educate us on what was going on. And to me, that was at the heart of advocacy. It's educating and it's storytelling on what your particular organization is doing. And that was important because, again, that added to the expanded knowledge base for the decision making to happen. And so we're really applying this particular notion forward in making sure that these other federal agencies that we haven't traditionally dealt with in the past are aware of the role that Parks and Rec agencies are playing so that they can have Parks and Rec in mind as they're developing these particular programs and grant opportunities. Now, more information will be provided about these grant opportunities at NRPA's Federal Funding Education webinars, which is a new offering that we've developed, and we're going to do those quarterly next year. So stay tuned for those. And if you have any questions, happy to connect to provide you some information about those. But what we want to do there is really bring experts to talk to you all about the funding, as well as other park and recreation departments who've been successful in attaining these particular funding opportunities and talking about how they did it, what projects they were able to apply it to. Because again, it's all about innovation and really thinking expansively on these particular opportunities. So hope that you all will consider attending those, and I look forward to seeing you at those. But I wanted to also give you a graphic view of what the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act. Now, again, 1.2 trillion, but in reality, a lot of that, 550 billion of that was new spending. The other portion of that was really just increasing funding levels for programs that already existed. As you can see here, previously passed transportation funding takes up a large chunk of the pie here. And then you have the other categories here. But again, we can figure out ways that how, whether it be public transportation, the water and wastewater infrastructure, looking at natural disaster prevention and mitigation. These are opportunity. These are ways in which park and recreation agencies are already doing the work, and they're providing those funding opportunities. So definitely there provides those increased chances for park and rec agencies to be receiving some of that funding. Now, wanted to get a little bit more into the opportunities that we have identified for park and recreation agencies. So we have $12 billion added to the Clean Water and State Revolving Funds, which includes, pardon me, my dogs are a little excited. Guys, Thank you. Be quiet, please. I know you're excited about the Infrastructure Investment Act, but we can't get too excited just yet. We have work to do. All right. 12, just under $12 billion added for funding for clean water in the state revolving fund, which includes that 10% set aside for green infrastructure projects, which park and rec agencies would be eligible for. There was $5 billion added for legacy pollution remediation. So these are brownfields and Superfund sites that can be turned into green public space areas. So those opportunities are there. There was $3.5 billion for FEMA's flood mitigation assistance program, which recognizes the nature-based solutions as a flood control mechanisms. So those would be opportunities as well. There was $1.38 billion for transportation alternatives, the TAP program, which you all might be familiar with, which includes facilities for pedestrians, bicyclists, non-motorized transportation, safe routes to school, recreational trails, and rails to trails. We've been working with our coalition partners on this one to really talk to the Department of Transportation to really help them see that, your traditional view of a park may be of a confined area, but in reality, it's the trails that provide connectivity and the alternative transportation methods, whether it be you're seeing a lot of bikes and scooters being used on the roads. Well, you need those trails for that, and those trails are being provided by park and recreation agencies. So really getting them to understand this particular program and how we can work better with them to expand those funding opportunities. Then there's also the $1 billion to connect local communities that were divided by previous transportation projects, oftentimes because of systematic racism. So definitely looking at those opportunities, and $500 million for wildfire defense grants for at-risk communities. This will help local communities develop approaches to tackle the growing issues of wildfires in our communities. So that, in a nutshell, are those opportunities. You're going to have to excuse me. I'm going to close the door. I don't want the dogs to distract us. So pardon me. Thank you, folks, and pardon that. I just didn't want the dogs to get too excited about the workforce development resources that we'll be talking about next. And so the other area where we saw a lot of opportunity was workforce development resources. There was a report done by NRPA that looked at workforce development opportunities in parks and recreation. And we found that 1 in 3 of the surveys responded indicated that their park and rec agency offers a workforce development and career exploration program. This makes sense to me because I remember my first job was during high school working at a park and rec agency. And so for many folks, it's oftentimes the first job we've ever had in park and rec agencies. And we definitely want to ensure that these opportunities are expanded to really provide a career path forward for all of those folks who want to go in. But at the same time, park and rec agencies can be that important first step for folks to get into career exploration. And so it definitely made sense for us to be looking at additional opportunities help, whether it be developing future park and recreation leaders, within the field. And we saw that nearly 9 in 10 agencies collaborated with partners on their workforce development programs. I know that I was talking recently to the New York City Department of Parks and Rec and how they have partnered with some of their social welfare programs to really be able to provide those, return to work opportunities and those training opportunities. And so parks can play an important role in helping communities and folks who are looking to re-enter the workforce. Usually partners are providing the vital support for recruiting, training, and connecting participants to jobs. And so We saw this because nearly, as I said, nearly 9 in 10 recreation agencies are collaborating with partners, usually nonprofit organizations, but also local school system, government agencies, for-profit charities, faith-based organizations, or local community groups to provide these opportunities. And so with that being said, we looked at the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, which mainly guides a lot of the workforce development programs coming out of the Department of Labor. Now, these are federal grants that are provided to states who then re-grant to municipalities to provide employment opportunity and training services for adult, youth, dislocated workers, and vocational rehabilitation participants. The graphic here shows exactly how, the three pillars work, because there's really looking to satisfy the need of businesses and workforce to drive these workforce solution, looking at, this one-stop shop for partnerships that can provide those opportunities, and looking to provide a workforce development system that can really support strong regional economies. And so if your organization or any partnership that you're in can provide those, you're in good standing in terms of being able to meet the requirements of and the intent of the WIOA Act, the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act. And so looking at the past year, the federal government awarded $99 billion in state apprenticeship expansion, equity, and innovation grants. This was just one of the grants that I looked at. There's many in place here. And I'll tell you why in a minute, because number one, these grants range from $2 million to $10 million, and $85 million was provided to states that demonstrated a commitment to increasing their diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, which definitely sounds like a lot of what our park and recreation agencies are doing, as well as looking to focus on partnerships with new industries and non-traditional occupations, including industry sectors hit hardest by the pandemic. Again, park and rec agencies have been in the middle of providing those particular opportunities for folks. So we saw that park and rec agencies can indeed be tapping into these particular funds. I looked at the distribution for last year. Again, just for this particular programs, there are programs that are designed to help women enter into the workforce. There are different, again, for adults, there's for youth, but this one was of interest to me because of what I outlined. And so last year, this was the money that was given out. Now, sadly enough, I didn't see Pennsylvania on this list. I know that in the past, it had been, some of that money had gone to Pennsylvania, and I'm hoping that in 2022, that money will be given to Pennsylvania. But I wanted to really highlight this because that money often goes to labor and workforce development agencies or the Department of Labor for a state, or the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, as it was in Oregon. So here you have the amounts and you had the agencies. And I wanted to highlight that because I had talked about looking expansively of how we can be looking for these opportunities. And it's often talking to, these particular, whether it be the Department of Commerce, the Department of Labor, or Workforce Development. And again, making the case of how park and recreation agencies are providing workforce development opportunities for their local community members. So let's keep our fingers crossed that Pennsylvania will be there next year, which would allow the Pennsylvania Park and Rec agencies to be able to tap into those funds. And now I wanted to talk a little bit about the conservation resources. As you all may be aware, the Land and Water Conservation Fund on the state's assistance side has been a traditional funder for Parks and Rec. And thanks to the Great American Outdoors Act passed in 2020, that now has consistent funding. So in 2021, a little over $302 million was sent to states for their state projects. There's also the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program, which provided $150 million through a nationally competitive grant for urbanized areas. There was also the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, which we saw that had a plus up in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And over just under $2 billion was given to states in 2021. Now, again, this has a 10% Green Project Reserve Fund, which again would provide opportunities for park and rec agencies looking to implement conservation projects. And so usually you can access these through your water utility, stormwater district, or by reaching out to your state economic protection agency equivalent office to really find out how, if your project is eligible, or what are the requirements, or start talking to them. Because again, the more they can find out about what you're doing, the more they can be connecting the dots as well and helping your agencies and departments make sure that you're tapping into these particular funds. And then I wanted to talk to you about community project funding. Now, Tim Hurd told me that you all can keep a secret, so I'm going to trust you. And these are essentially, the secret is this, that these are earmarks. You all might remember earmarks from prior years, and they were really stopped about a decade ago, I believe. Now they've been brought back, but they've been brought back as community project funding. So that's the secret I wanted to share with you. We're not really calling them earmarks, they're calling them community project funding. Now, last year in 2021 was the first time that these were put back into the budget. And it was only 1% of discretionary spending that was allowed to go to community funding projects. So that was potentially $16 billion that were going out. Now, there were some park districts that were chosen in FY21. And the secret to, why they were chosen is, essentially, there were the committee members who decided on these particular projects. There were recommendations made to all of the state senators and state representatives in Congress. And out of all of these, they forward them forward to the committee, which decided the Appropriations Committee. And the Appropriations Committee, each one of those members could only put forth 10 projects. And out of those 10, then the committee had to decide collectively of which ones would move forward. Well, the ones that were really chosen were ones in which there was a lot of collaboration across districts, across communities, because it was, again, looking to make the greatest impact with the limited funding that was provided there. And so I believe it was 3 or 4 park projects that were included in that. And we were happy to see those move through. So the trick to that was talking to your elected officials early and asking them what was the process that they have for community project funding. And if, it's usually shovel-ready projects that are being chosen for this. So if you have shovel-ready projects that are in the works and you've been working across different districts and communities, it's highly likely that your project could really be attractive to them. So there is going to be a process for FY22, which is going to start soon. And again, we'll provide more information on this on our funding education webinars that are going to be provided. But the trick here is to start talking to elected officials, your city leaders early, and finding out what their plan is or what they're looking to move forward, so that you can really start getting in the pipeline for these particular opportunities. And the final section here was how to access federal resources. Well, you all might be aware, when it comes to federal government, grants.gov is often the first stop that folks look at to be able to look at what grant opportunities are coming out of the federal government. But we have also made sure that we can provide current grant opportunities. And so definitely encourage you to visit our website, nrpa.org, for under our work in grant and fundraising resources, which we are definitely dedicating more and more time to letting folks know what is available for them to apply to. And then some other great resources that you can access is the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Here's their website, and they have a robust listing of those particular opportunities, as does the National League of Cities. The National Governors Associations also does a good job of collecting all of these particular opportunities and breaking them down both by state and by sector, so that you can really hone in on what you're looking to do. The National Association of Counties provides similar resources, and mentor.org is providing a lot of information there on the workforce development opportunities. We've been working with mentoring, pardon me, I said mentor, it's www.mentoring.org, but the Mentor Network, we've been working with them on the Youth Workforce Readiness Act, which would provide more workforce development opportunity for youth, and would go to national nonprofits where definitely interested in applying for one of those opportunities, because then we could re-grant it out to our state and local park and rec agencies, because we know the important work that you all are doing. There's also apprenticeship.gov. That chart I showed you before with all of the state listings for the Workforce Development Act, that came from apprenticeship.gov. And like I said, that's basically what the Department of Labor is using to really announce their grant opportunities. And I highly encourage you to take a look at it, because I just tapped one of their workforce development programs, but there are many others. And so with that being said, wanted to thank you very much for listening to me and my dogs this whole time, and wanted to have that conversation with you for any questions you may have or any info you want to share. So with that being said, I am back. I hope you all are still there, because all I see is the screens. Hey,
I remind folks, please use that chat box there, or we are a small group here, so if you do have questions, we can kind of raise our hand and bring things up. I was very interested in seeing the spin on language, in a sense, is thinking of our parks as infrastructure pieces as opposed to amenities and things that are nice to have. Some of that messaging, I mean, are there some best practices maybe that you can share with folks about how do we talk with those elected officials, and what kind of phrases are really working right now in communities? What are some of those stories that you're hearing?
Yeah, thank you, BK. It's a great question. And, to us, we're using adaptable infrastructure, right? During the pandemic, many of our park and recreation agencies doubled up as, emergency dispatch centers, right? I mean, I remember national news where, Central Park in New York City was a makeshift hospital at one point because the hospitals were overflowing. And I'm sure in many of your communities, you were providing those kind of emergency response services. So for us, it was the adaptable infrastructure. As you said, we're not amenities, we're critical infrastructure, but we're also adaptable infrastructure. And so I think that when elected officials hear that, this particular investment can be a multifaceted use, a multi-purpose use, it lights up their eyes, and it gets them thinking in new ways, because again, they are charged with investing public dollars, and they want to make sure that those public dollars are really getting the best return as possible. And so I think it makes the case in that way too. In our advocacy shop, we've been really developing a lot of toolkits for providing more information on how you can use social media and trainings on social media to be able to, tag particular elected officials. But at the same time, we've been looking at, I talked about tapping the public. And so we've done a toolkit on how to write a letter to the editor. And we found that these were important when we were looking to pass the Great American Outdoors Act. And, when we were doing the Infrastructure Jobs and Investment Act advocacy, a lot of folks were doing letters to the editor, which were providing that additional expansion of knowledge for folks and connecting those dots. One thing I found about our park and rec professionals is that incredibly dedicated professionals and incredibly humble professionals. And so sometimes we have a hard time, either saying we need help or, telling folks the great job that we're doing because of that humbleness. But I also think it's important to be able to tell those stories in a compelling way to show the impact that we're making, as well as, the assistance and resources that are needed to continue making that impact. It's just a reality that without those resources, this, wouldn't be able to continue. And I have to channel my inner Jason Lang. He's, East Goshen Township, and he has this great, he puts up a slide of Muhammad Ali and Sugar Ray Robinson. And when he does that, he says, who is the greatest fighter of all time? And he usually takes a poll. And in fact, if I did that right now, let's try it out. You know, the greatest fighter of all time, boxer of all time, you can put it in the chat just so we start using it. Who would you all say is the greatest of all time? No. Yeah, I saw Mike Tyson there, but between Muhammad Ali.
I don't know if Tyson was a choice.
Yeah, between Ali and, but that's a good way of thinking outside the box. I do appreciate that. But yeah, between, you know, Muhammad Ali and Sugar Ray Robinson. Let's see what folks are saying here. Let me look at the chat. Yeah.
Most of the answers in there were Ali. It looks like, oh, there's one Sugar Ray.
No, they like
a lot of Ali's, a lot of Rocky Balboa.
Rocky Balboa.
Yeah, there you
go.
Can't
be Rocky.
Yeah.
You can't be Rocky.
Philly pride. Okay.
Exactly. Well, it ends up that, you know, Muhammad Ali, I don't have the stats in front of me right now, but I believe it was 56 wins and 5 losses. And Sugar Ray Robinson had like 162 wins and just under 20 losses. So by far, it was Sugar Ray Robinson who had the greater record. But most folks say Muhammad Ali because Muhammad Ali was able to own that term. He coined it. He was the greatest promoter of all time. He was a great boxer, don't get me wrong, an incredible boxer. But he also was able to, you know, really take hold of that messaging. And so the messaging matters. And, you know, when Jason just put that slide forward, it was just impressive in terms of, you know, what we tell people really can make a difference. So I highly encourage, you know, how we can be telling the public, how we can be a little bit more active, because I know that there's also rules that don't always prevent us from doing that advocacy work ourselves. You know, you can't be telling the mayor or council members, you know, what to do. You can be asking them, but can't be telling them, but the public can. And I think if you can get that message to the public, it's a very useful and important tool for getting that message again to the elected officials for those resources to start flowing more towards Park and Rec.
Now, so, I'm curious on the toolkit aspect of things, in the mindsets that they're created or I guess, are they moldable in a sense that urban setting folks can use the same toolkits as the rural setting folks, or is there different toolkits in that kind of sense? How do we adjust those and use that for our best purposes?
Thank you, BK. Yeah, that's a good question. And I think when we began this, we definitely tried to make them as generic as possible, so that you could adapt and pick. But yes, hearing back from our members, we heard both, you know, we definitely, you know, I live in my particular district, you know, I have one set of lawmakers from a certain party, and, you know, these talking points won't necessarily work. So we've been working on adapting our particular toolkits to reflect that, both for urban and rural setting. You're absolutely correct. Different needs for those communities, and we want to reflect, but as well as, you know, depending on, you know, what the political makeup of your particular area is too. I mean, you're going to need talking points that'll appeal to one party, and sometimes you're going to need talking points that'll appeal to another party. And so being able to just make sure that we're adapting them as much as possible. And we always do them in terms of, you know, the messaging. We like to really, and the American Great Outdoors Act really proved this, that, you know, parks and recreation are a bipartisan issue, right? They're a nonpartisan issue, in fact, right? Both sides of the aisle really will come together to support. I mean, the Great American Outdoors Act, there was 73 senators that voted for it in the middle of the pandemic, when, you know, everything was so tumultuous during that time. And so you saw that Parks and Rec, and one of the things we're doing is really building more and more relationships across the aisles, because we're saying, you know, Parks and Recreation are above partisan politics. It's an issue that, you know, we all want to see greener spaces in our neighborhoods. We all want to make sure that we have quality parks, you know, that the programming by our recreation centers, particularly for our youth, is top notch. And so these are issues that don't really take a party side. And so really looking to enhance our relationship building on both sides of the aisles, so that there can be more support from both parties for these particular aspects. But here's where it's important too. It's what we can all learn from you all, right? Again, having worked in Washington, I always call it the Washington bubble, right? What we see on paper or what we believe to be, a good program is only as good as it looks and as much as we know. But when it's, implemented at the field level, there can be considerations there that we just wouldn't have taken into account because we don't know the specifics of a community. And so the implementation might have not gone on as smoothly. And it's not till we hear back on, those considerations that we can really adjust our approach. So here's where we have, really an open door policy, and let us know. In fact, one of the things we're doing now, I talked about the American Rescue Plan opportunities. One of the things, we put out a survey recently, which looked at what are the park and rec agencies that have been able to tap into those funds, and how did you do it, and for what programs? We're building these case studies because we want to collect those stories and lift them up in terms of showing other members, oh, look, somebody was able to tap a CDC fund for this particular, health and wellness program. Or, again, Baltimore was able to tap some of that broadband funding from the American Rescue Plan and CARES Act, the one previous to that, for their STEM center in education. And they were, being able to piece it all together. And so we want to lift these stories up to show folks how it can be done. But again, to me, learning is always a two-way street. So we welcome your ideas, welcome your challenges in helping us better figure out how we can be better crafting both our toolkits and our messaging to elected officials.
And what kind of looking at things at potential allies that we've seen, or you've seen stories wise, what are some of those other organizations that may be within our states or even at that federal level that really, sometimes it seems like we have conflicting interests, but we really could be going at this, the apples together in a sense, like I see some overlap with EPA you mentioned for the stormwater kind of things, but where are those other opportunities that you're really seeing those kind of stories?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two answers to that. One is, one of the ones that we've been working with Maine in this particular area, one of the ones that we're seeing that they're doing a lot of more outreach to is the chambers of commerce. And, you would say, well, chambers of commerce and parks and recreation, how do those two? Well, park and recreations can, most park and recreation agencies will hold, festivals, farmers markets, the concerts, right? In Chicago, one of the largest concert venues, in their public parks in Millennium Park. And so, really and so park and recreations generate economic activity. In 2017, local park and recreation agencies generated $166 billion of economic activity across the country. And we've been able to gather this at NRPA. We have, if you look up local economic impacts, economic impacts of local parks. If you Google that and put NRPA, it'll take you right to that website. And what you can do too is you can look at, in fact, I'm going to do it right now. I'll show you how easy it is. Impact. And so what you can do is is you can look at the state level information of local parks. And so, and I'm going to give you what the Pennsylvania numbers are. Give me 1 second. Here it is. And let me look at the state level. In Pennsylvania in 2017, all right, your economic activity rating was 14 out of the 51 states. It's 51, I think, plus the District of Columbia. So local economic activity generated by local parks in Pennsylvania was $2 billion, just shy of $3 billion. You were able to support 15,000 jobs across the state, and labor income was just under 700 million, right? So taking this information and being able to then say to, working with, chambers of commerce to say, hey, we're a major economic driver. Pennsylvania is 14 out of the 51, regions, 51 states, again, including the District of Columbia. That's you're in a good place there, and you're generating a lot. So working with chambers of commerce to then build those coalitions, and then being able to go to elected officials and saying this is how park and recreation is helping local economies. So workforce development opportunities, or economic grants, or tourism. The tourism grants that we saw out of the American Rescue Plan. How you now have made a compelling case of how you qualify for that. The other one that I wanted to point out, the number 2, was the economic impact statement. So we're really proud of our research work that we do here at NRPA, because we get that information from you all. So thank you very much for always filling out those surveys. And if you haven't, they're usually short, and they're important because they allow us to collect this information. And we've created impact statements that are really backed by our research. And these were really designed to help our park and rec agencies be able to tell their stories in a better way. And so there are 5 economic impact statements that we have developed, and I'll share them. I'm going to put them on the chat so you all can access them. So here you go. Right there is the website. You can access them. And again, these are impact statements that are backed by research. So Parks and Recreation promotes health and wellness. And we have, evidence that, people who live near a park are both physically and mentally healthier than those who don't, and can live longer lives. We talk about park and recreation programming and education activities are critical to early childhood development. And we talk about how 92% of agencies include team sports and league for their youth sport offerings. We talk about STEM education and how environmental and outdoor activities are a major part of that, how parks and recreation drive economic opportunity. I already talked about the $116 billion that was generated. And we can also look at how, this is the one that always gets me, that, a review of 33 studies suggests that a home value premium will increase by 8 to 10% for properties that are adjacent to a passive park. Not even an active park, but a passive park. Now, if I'm, a municipal elected official hearing that, saying like, wait a second, if there's a passive park, home values are going up by 8 to 10%. To me, that's like, well, that means that the tax revenue from those homes for the city is greater. So we invest more in parks, home values go up, which in turn drive, the tax revenue for the city, allowing us to then reinvest. So it's a virtuous cycle there. And then there's, Parks and Recreation unite, people from all different communities and strengthen communities by being able to bring them to farmers markets, festivals, and how people really feel that, being near a park is better for their well-being. And again, Parks and Recreation is essential and adaptable infrastructure that makes our communities resilient in the face of natural disasters and climate change. So these particular 5 statements are backed by research that we have done. You can see them there and you can use them. And these become helpful talking points to be able to reframe the conversation that we're having with the public and with elected officials on what the contributions of parks and recreation agencies are.
So it's controlling that story, or at least you're making your point as opposed to allowing others to kind of tell you how it works. That's a great spin.
The Muhammad Ali approach, right? We're the greatest of all time.
That's right. Yes. we're starting to see some questions come in now, and
Yeah.
there's one in there that brings up a good point. A lot of our facilities, with COVID, some things got shut down, especially, even youth sports and things had to hold off. And so some of those assets, like our fields and those facilities that have been shut down, may be seeing neglect or damage. And
Yeah.
how can we use the language to make sure we get some money to get back in? Because it's maintenance. Now that's
Yes.
is the money available for maintenance purposes and kind of those things, or is it all new projects and capital investment kind of thing? So how do we do that?
Absolutely, yeah. So when you look at the stateside grants, there are opportunities there from the Land Water Conservation Fund that would provide for those particular opportunities. In some of the cases you can even buy new land, but that land has to remain in perpetuity because it's public land and it can never be sold off. So there are some captions to that. But then, again, the brownfields, we saw money available for brownfields too. So that's taking just an area that has really just been run down and being able to turn that around. In terms of maintenance too, depending on where your area is, if you're in an urbanized area, then you can tap into the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program that would allow for those opportunities. But I think the trick is, and what's happening a lot is, we're seeing a lot of folks taking action at the state level, right? So being able to talk to your state local officials, you're now more aware of the talking points and how they can be crafted in talking to them. Because again, in Michigan, we're seeing it in North Carolina now too, that they were able to make compelling a case for investment in park and recreation. Now, part of this is, yes, during the pandemic, I think states and municipalities got a little concerned that their tax revenues were going to fall. And of course, they tightened up the purse strings. But what we're seeing now too is that actually the economic activity went up. It just shifted from one sector to another, and states had overflow. California had an overflow of funding, when it was expecting a budget shortfall. And so they were able to reinvest back. I think the trick there becomes to be able to talk to your elected officials, and as they're re-releasing some of these funds back to the state agencies, that they're aware of what Parks and Recreation would need. So it doesn't always come from the federal opportunities. The state and local county opportunities can be there too. Baltimore, again, I'll point them out because they were really able to make a compelling case about the food distribution that they did during the pandemic. And they had an increase in their budget from the county supervisor, mainly because the public was telling that county supervisor how much Parks and Rec were helping out their community and how important they were, that when the director, Rosalind Johnson, went she tells a great story of when she went to talk to the county supervisor. She goes, "I don't want to hear it. Your public has already been talking to me. We're going to get you more funding." So she didn't even have to make the case. The case had already been made for her to release some of those funds back. So definitely, and again, there's going to be the community funding projects that are going to be available there, which, if you're looking to repair, enhance ball fields, or you're looking to enhance that particular area, and it's going to impact different communities, or how you can work collaboratively with communities. It could be a project that could be, earmarked. I'm not supposed to say that, but yeah, it could be a community funding project there that could come directly. So it's the engagement piece. And if, you feel uncomfortable engaging, that's absolutely fine. Who can you partner up with that can engage? And we're happy to, help you think through that. Tim Hurd and PRPS, y'all are great at your advocacy work and really making the case. So how can we be really working together to find the allies and partners that can, have those resources, have that know-how to be able to carry the ball across the field, to use a sports pun here.
Sure. This kind of goes along these lines of the same question. Well, not same question, but a similar line of question. And what about some of the the losses that programs may have. They had to shut down, or due to capacity issues, they just weren't making their budgets because, we expect 1,000 people to come in a week and we were only allowed to allow so many in. And so is there economic development money or things to kind of make things even, or worry about cover those kind of losses?
Yeah, I think that knowing, having that awareness of what the states were able to get from, the CARES Act, I'm sorry, the American Rescue Plan, what they were able, to, because again, then the states, I remember one particular line item, there was $10 billion, or no, sorry, $10 million that states were given and that the governor had discretion to use for agencies and organizations that supported vital education, right? To me, that just screamed, recreation centers, because when schools had to shut down, recreation centers kind of had to open those up, and you had to kind of have makeshift classrooms put into place. And so again, it's being able to make that case to your local elected officials and saying, hey, our numbers went down, but it was because of the capacity issues, and helping them understand. Again, when you're advocating, you're educating. And so that's an important piece that we can actively participate in, is educating elected officials on what the context of that was. Because sometimes, again, we're just looking at numbers and we're, without that full context. And so being able to help them understand the context behind that will be helpful in going to those states. And on top of this, one of the things I've been really advocating for is this new way of thinking. When it comes budget season, we're often pitted, agencies are pitted against each other, right? So they make the case on why their budget should be supported. And, the traditional thinking have been, well, if I give more money to you, I have to take money away from this particular agency. And so they're always trying to balance it. Well, to me, that's addressing a 21st century problem with a 20th century approach, right? Because what's happening now is that, as you all have experienced, is you're working on public health, vaccinate. I went the other day to a park to, I had to have a quick COVID test, and I went to a park to do that rather than to a hospital, right? And so there are services that are being provided now that complement what other agencies are doing. So rather than to be, kind of being pitted against each other, how about talking to each other and saying, like, well, where can our budgets be really coordinated here, in terms of, if you're providing this particular public health service, it's being implemented at a park, how can we be joining our budgets in a way that's really maximizing taxpayer dollar? And I think that's, a paradigm shift, and that's important because then we're not being pitted against each other, rather than coordinated working with each other. There's better collaboration across city agencies, whether it be education, whether it be public health, whether it be workforce development, whether it be transportation, whether it be helping people who are experiencing homelessness. That are myriad of ways in which park and recreation are at the center of that. And rather than to saying, well, if you give it to them, you're not giving it to us, saying, no, like, we can collaborate on this together and it be saving resources for our local community while increasing the impact.
You're talking about bridging silos. That's some scary stuff, Elvis.
I think my dogs might start barking again if we keep talking like this. But you know what? Expanding and growing is always has a little bit of fear to it, but it's normal, right? Because we're going into the unknown and we're moving into a new area. So definitely exciting at the same time in seeing what we can do. And again, we're looking to highlight case studies of where that's happening, so you have an example of how it can be done. And you know which agency has done it. So I've mentioned some of them, Michigan, North Carolina, California. I've mentioned Baltimore. How can agencies be learning and talking to each other too? Sharing these best practices. And that's one thing we're really want to do, is elevating those stories to just show how park and rec field is an innovative field and is moving forward into that 21st century.
That's fantastic. I do remind folks, please, if you do have more questions, pop them into that chat box there. I'll bring them up as we can. Otherwise, you'll just hear my voice and Elvis's voice. But I have a question. This is kind of one of my questions for understanding the money a little bit better. And maybe you can clarify. I watch the news and it's just, these numbers are just astronomical to me, that as far as I can't get a head around it. But I also wonder, where is the money? And so I guess, what money is in what account at this point, and what money is promised but maybe coming, and like, so those kind of things, and what is there, and then what stuff is going to be there but it's already gone.
Yeah. So when we were talking about the infrastructure bill, I talked about how there was, $550 million were new programs that were created, but the other side of that was just existing programs that had increased money. And so in if you all attended the NRPA workshop, there was, I believe, a workshop on appropriations and how appropriations works. But essentially, all of these programs exist already. They have some are mandatory and some are discretionary. The mandatory ones have a set amount, such as the Land Water Conservation Fund, right? There's the mandatory spending of $900 million for it. And then there's discretionary fund, which then Congress can adjust every year. And so that's when, when the appropriation process happens, it happens at the state level too, right? And so how do we make sure that we're making the best case during that time? Because it's similar to the budget season that happens at the local and county levels. And so really it's at that point the funding levels are adjusted. And so the bill, when we talk about 1.2 trillion, it's over a span of time that, this money is going to be spent. The other part of that is that, and so the appropriations will drive that, the mandatory spending will drive that. And then the other piece is the new programs that are going to be created. That's somewhere where we see a lot of opportunity, and we're engaging with federal agencies and saying, hey, you're going to create a new program on, transportation, or you're going to create a new program on, green infrastructure for the waste, water, or, the brownfields or anything like that. We would go and talk to them and saying, as you're developing this program, because they've been now appropriated, X amount of dollars, and, X amount of dollars is going to achieve these particular impacts. Well, to achieve these particular impacts, we make the case that Park and Recreation already has, an effect on that particular, we just want to have a better seat at the table, to be able to, help educate the federal officials on what Parks and Rec are doing, to then make sure that the guidelines for those particular grant programs do include. I'm going to give you one specific example. There was a bill that we were working on, improving social determinants of health. And that particular bill would give additional funding for state and local public health agencies, right? That was the language. Now, we went and we said, well, did you know that Parks and Recreation are providing vaccinations, they're providing mental health services, they're providing, COVID testing, aside from all of these other public health services? They weren't aware of that. They said, wow, we weren't aware of that. So our ask was, we could just, if you could please insert and local park and recreation agencies that provide these services, just a couple of words. You're not changing the bill overall, you're just providing these. That opens up those opportunities for now, park and recreation agencies. Everybody was in agreement with it, and we were able to get it done. And again, we're not changing the whole bill, we're just tweaking the language. So more or less, that's where advocacy fits in, and that's how, the money is appropriated over years to meet those particular impacts.
Well, that was a fantastic example. It was just definitely adding a couple of words and just making the definition a bit broader, allows for different interpretations. Well, that's great. Well, we are at the end of our time. I would like to thank Elivs Cordova for speaking with us and sharing his insights on how we can best advocate and go get that money for our programs, and work with others out there to help accomplish goals together for our communities. Don't forget, individuals desiring continuing education credits for this session. The word was resources for this session. Put that on your spreadsheet, and then at the end of the conference, send that back in so that you will get your credits. In light of the time here, I would like to thank you all and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone. And if you need any more info, please feel free to reach out. And like I said, love hearing from you all, love learning from you all. And it was a pleasure to be here with you today. And my dogs say hello too.
It's not a Zoom conference until you see somebody's cat or hear a dog go off. That's just the way it is.
Thanks, PK.